Hello there. You're listening to Shaff Dives You Crazy podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Emperor Divers, trusted dive pros with epic trips in the Red Sea, Maldives, and more. Check them out at emperordivers.com. Big thanks to them for supporting the show. Hey, welcome back to Shaff Dives You Crazy, the show where we dive into the deep, dark, and often absurd world of the people who live most of their lives underwater, mentally and literally. Today's guest is the kind of guy who makes most divers think, I'd like to be him, but maybe with fewer hours spent inside a cave. Phil Short is a professional cave diver, tech diver, and a true expedition veteran. He spent over 45 days underground on a single project, worked with everyone from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to the US National Park Service, and has helped bring home World War II heroes from the depths. He is a fellow of the Explorers Club, a guy who is as comfortable under 90 meters as most of us are on our sofas. And he's here with us today. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. That was quite an introduction, but it's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure having you here, Phil. So, Phil, every diver has that moment, yeah? When did you first fall in love with diving?
So interestingly, I found diving by kind of accident. I was a dry caver, a speleologist,
Hmm.
or a spelunker, as the Americans call it, and I was gradually extending my skills as a dry caver. And inevitably, with dry caves, they travel downhill, as does the water that creates them, and eventually you reach the water in an underground river and then an underground passageway, and eventually the water meets the ceiling and the way on is closed to the normal caver. I was aware of this thing called a cave diver, so I wanted
Uh-huh.
to extend my abilities to go further in caves and hopefully one day to actually explore caves never before seen by humans. And I knew to
Mhm.
do that, I had to become a cave diver. So I approached one of the cave diving organizations in the UK, the British CDG or Cave Diving Group, and asked them how this would take place. And they said, well, first you must just go away and learn to dive. So I went off and did my open water diver course. And my first dive was in a stone quarry in the winter, like February, in a wetsuit. The water temperature was 6 degrees Celsius. And we descended down. I was very shallow, like 10 meters, by part of an old underwater wrecked aeroplane, and a couple of fish swam by, and I was like, wow, I'm floating here, neutrally buoyant, breathing underwater, looking at these fish in their natural environment, and I was kind of hooked. So from that day on, that was back in 1990, I followed two paths: the path of becoming a diver and extending my diving capabilities and experiences, and also the path of becoming a cave diver and becoming a cave explorer.
Wow. And what was the spark that told you that this wasn't just going to be a hobby? This will be your like profession.
I think the instructor who trained me at open water level, so that very first level, and what I've tried to do is based on the experiences with that instructor, a guy called Steve Axtell, is to follow what he did for me, in that you have to teach the first level in a way that doesn't just give the dive student some basic skills and go, here's your C card, you're a diver, but has to inspire them with what diving is, that it's more than that, that it gives you an ability to be part of an environment you can't go naturally and to be immersed in it and enjoy every part of it. So going from open water to advanced, then my rescue course with him, I started to realize that I not only wanted to do this myself, but I wanted to share it with others. Probably about 18 months after first starting, I was then working for him as a dive master. 2 years after starting, I was working for him as an instructor. And I found that I got equal amounts of pleasure for me out of sharing my passion and teaching others as I did out of doing the dives for myself. So the two together gave me the platform to follow a 35-year career.
Wow. And when did you start following tech or become a tech diver?
So very quickly, because of the cave diving, I was aware of this thing called nitrox that was really new
The
in
voodoo gas. Yeah.
voodoo gas. Exactly. When I started, it was brand new. There was nobody in the UK teaching it. You could get old secondhand copies of some magazines from America that were talking about it. And eventually, one UK school brought it across from America and offered the basic nitrox course. So I went and did that. And then I did my second mentor after Steve Axel taught me to dive and gave me that level of inspiration to carry on. My second mentor in my career was Kevin Gurr. So I
Okay.
went and did my advanced nitrox and my technical nitrox and my trimix open circuit with him. And then eventually I did my first rebreather training with Dave Thompson, and then became a rebreather instructor, again through Dave Thompson on the inspiration unit. And then from there, I went on to become a test diver, working with Kev Gurr with his companies, with the Ouroboros, then the Sentinel rebreather. And so effectively, I was lucky enough that I'd become a diver before the tech boom in the UK in the early 90s. And when it started in the mid 90s, I was there at the very beginning. So I believe from memory, I was on the second ever open circuit trimix course run in the UK. And the first course was run the weekend before ours. So it was a really new thing, new community. Everyone knew everyone, everyone was talking together. And then we began to form teams, go out and dive virgin wrecks in the channel in the 50, 60, 70, 80-meter range. So we were really treading new ground that hadn't been possible up until that point, because with air that wasn't available. Sometimes people say the right place at the right time. I think my age means that I began at a period of growth, at a period of transition, and at the beginning of something new that's now become norm.
Yeah, when I started diving, I mean, I did my first course, open water course, officially in 95. And even then, like, nitrox was like a not even a thing in the Maldives.
You,
Nobody
you,
heard about it even.
yeah, that's right. I mean, you said like voodoo gas, and it literally was called that. Like, oh, you can't dive it because you'll get bent, or you can't dive it because if you breathe nitrox, they can't treat you, or you this. And
Y-
slowly, the manufacturers came on board, the training agencies came on board, and now, in areas like the Caribbean, it's almost impossible to find air diving and air cylinder fills. It's just normal to dive nitrox because we now understand it and we know that of all the advantages that it has.
Exactly. And do you want to know the first rebreather that I saw with my own eyes in the Maldives?
What was it?
A CIS Luna.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that the Mark IV?
I don't know. It was just, I was with the military that time, with the Coast Guard, and
Okay.
we were going by, and then on a dive dhoni, on a small, like a open dive dhoni, we saw one guy having this massive unit on the back. I went close by on the speedboat, and what is this? And he just said, "Oh, it's a rebreather. You don't get bubbles or anything." I was like, "All
No.
right, cool."
Yeah. Yeah, it's an
Didn't have,
incredible tool.
yeah. And I want to ask you about this crazy cave system, the J2 cave that you did. 45 days underground. It's like straight into madness, I guess.
It's a good question. It was actually an interesting and a good lead in. So you're talking about seeing the Cisluna in the Maldives, and basically the designer of the Cisluna and the owner of Cisluna Rebreather Company was Bill Stone. Now, Bill Stone built the Cisluna Mark One for a 24-hour dive in the Wakulla Spring in Florida as part of the Wakulla 2 project. And he basically then evolved it on to be basically suitable for more normal users, for more normal dives. It became the Mark II, the Mark III, the Mark IV. And if you continue on in the history of it, the electronic control system for the Poseidon rebreathers, the Mark VI and then the Mark VII, is the heart of the Cisluna system. So basically, Bill Stone's design and the failure modes and safety of Bill Stone's design. And so Bill had been exploring caves for basically 4 decades. It's his passion, and
Mhm.
specifically in the mountain regions of the town of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. And there you have a huge limestone mountain range. Within it is the cave systems of Chevra, of Huatla, and of
Mhm.
J2. And a lot of people say, oh, J2 is a strange name. It's not so romantic as Chevra or Huatla. Simply is the Polish word for cave begins with a J. So they were prospecting, meaning looking for new cave entrances. And they went through the jungle and went, right, there's cave one, put it on the map. There's cave two, put it on the map. There's cave three, put it on the map. And they kept going. And some of these entrances didn't turn out to be anything, but cave two, J2, turned out to be something really rather big and really rather special. Basically, in 2009, a big team went to J2. They managed to get to the first flooded section underground, which was over 10 kilometers into the earth horizontally and over a kilometer into the earth vertically. And they dived that first flooded section. Beyond the flooded section, there was more dry cave. There was another flooded section, but they didn't need to dive that because there was a dry passage that went over the top of it. But then they found the third flooded section, which had to be dived, and the team dived it to around 300 meters of horizontal distance. And it was getting shallower and it looked like it was about to surface, but they ran out of equipment and time and they had to come out of the cave. And so J2 2013 project I was on as lead diver was to extend that flooded section. And everybody thought it was just going to quickly go to surface from where it was at 300 meters, but it did the exact opposite. It went deeper and it doubled in length. So passing the number 4 flooded section took a 600-meter long dive, not deep, 22 meters of depth, but very remote, nearly 12 kilometers into the earth horizontally and 1.2 kilometers vertically. And if you
Mhm.
think of the way people climb Everest, straight to the top, they go to camp 1, acclimatize, camp 2, acclimatize, camp 3, and then a support team are constantly resupplying those camps. So a big team get a couple of people to the summit. And with J2, there were 50 people, and those 50 people were able to keep Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, and Camp 4 resupplied so that we were able to eventually make that dive and pass Sump 4, the fourth flooded section, and then map and explore the dry cave beyond that flooded section and come out of the cave. But to do this, I personally spent 45 days underground. The longest single excursion was 21 days, so 3 weeks complete, where you're literally living underground, sleeping underground, eating underground, everything. And it was just amazing because for me, from that humble beginning in 1990, I was actually now on a blank piece of paper. I wasn't following a map that somebody else had drawn or a satellite had created or some sort of mechanical drone had created. I was on a blank piece of paper exploring a piece of the earth that no human being had ever seen before, no light had shone on before. And it was for me culmination of all the skills that I'd spent 30 years learning.
Wow. How was the mental game?
Interestingly, we were involved with some research for NASA, one of which was on nutrition and
Mhm.
calorie use, and the other was on whether high stress enforced environments would affect things like reborn diseases from childhood. One example would be chickenpox. So we did samples, saliva samples, and blood samples throughout the expedition, before the expedition, and afterwards to help NASA. They designed our food intake, our calorie intake, and at the end result was that this phenomenon of these diseases reoccurring because of stress didn't happen to anyone involved in the expedition. They worked out the reason why is because we were like children in a toy shop, run around for 20 minutes and grab what you like, because we're cavers. We're cave explorers. We love the cave, the geology, the structure, the formation, whether it be dry or underwater or both. So we were doing what we love. We were following our passion, we were exploring, and we were seeing new caves. So basically, we were happy. The way that you deal with being in the dark for 24 hours a day for 21 days is you just have discipline. So we had an alarm clock, wake up at 8, we'd have coffee and breakfast. Then there would be a team radio call between all the camps and the surface base camp at 9. The team would discuss the plans for the day. They would determine any resupply needed for any camp, like food or fuel or anything like this. And then the team would go about their work for the day. And then later on at 9 in the evening, it would be the end of day team radio call. Everyone would just debrief the day, any survey data was given across the radio so the map could be drawn live whilst we were exploring. Team would then have a last pot of coffee, talk, relax a little bit. We used to read a book to each other, take it in turns, one chapter per night, and then you'd go to sleep and wake up the next morning. So you had a routine: three
Okay.
meals a day at meal times, wake up at wake up time, sleep at sleep time. So you didn't get out of a rhythm, and by doing that, you were so busy and enjoying yourself, you didn't really notice.
I want to ask you, like, I did this 50-hour dive in 2022, continuous at 6 meters, not deep. You must have read about it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. And on day one, I jumped at around 3:30 or something in the afternoon. And then around 10:30 in the evening, my mind just went, what the hell am I doing here? Did you ever think like that during the J2 cave thing?
Honestly, I didn't. I mean, literally, I'd spent a year training for the project. I was already an experienced caver and cave diver. I had done previous underground camps, but nowhere near as long. So I think my previous longest was 4 days, 4 nights. So by the time I arrived, flew to New York, met some of the team, flew to Mexico City, took the truck and drove all the way down to the ranch, got all the gear up on top of the mountain with the donkeys, began. So by the time I went underground the first time, I was so psyched and so ready for the expedition. I was in expedition mode. There was no real world. There was no internet. There was no Facebook. There was no Instagram. There was no telephone. It was completely immersed in the jungle for 3 months. Even when you were out of the cave, you were under the primary canopy on the
Mhm.
mountain in the jungle, eating camp food. You could rest a little bit. You could overdo it with calories to recharge before you had to go back underground. So you were just literally 100% focused on the mission, and there were no distractions. So yeah, I didn't have one single point in 3 months where I thought, "Why am I here? What am I doing here?" It was amazing.
That's awesome. I mean, for me, everybody was telling me when I started planning the 50-hour dive, no, no, you need to do at least 2 years of training, gradually increase the time all the way to 12 hours and then do it. And to be honest, I didn't do any dive longer than 3 hours.
Yeah,
And the trainings I did uh, maybe 2 months before the actual dive.
yeah,
And just when I felt like that, when my mental state started going down, I don't know, it just something kicked in. The military background and the trainings that you don't give up, you
yes,
never give up,
yeah,
and that
exactly.
and then there were a lot of people who were waiting to see me fail. So that also again gave me a boost.
Yeah, that gives you strength.
Uh,
Gives you
yeah.
strength. Yep.
So that was my way of getting through that. So you spent years bridging the diving world with archaeology and science, right?
Yes.
So what's it like diving the Antikythera? Yeah,
And
Antikythera.
Antikythera. First of all, what an explanation of what Antikythera is. So basically, in Greece there is the mainland, and then at the southern tip of the mainland, the Peloponnese, there is the ocean. And if you go out towards the south, there's a big island called Kythera, which is a beautiful place,
Hmm.
and there's some
I've
very
heard of it.
famous,
Yeah.
very famous wrecks there. And then if you look at a big map and you don't really pay much attention, after Kifera, keep going south. The next thing you hit is the very large and very beautiful island of Crete. Between Kifera and Crete, there's a tiny rock. It's around 20 kilometers long. It's only about 5 or 6 kilometers wide across at the widest point, but it's very, very high. It's a big sort of mountainous rock. There's a small village and there's a lighthouse at the other end, and other than that, nothing but some goats that are grazing and farms there. And the small village is in a harbour called Potamus, and there's about 10 people live there permanently. It's quite popular for bird watching, but the reason it's called Antikythera is because it is
Mhm.
under Kythera, so it's a little
Okay.
rock that's under the island of Kythera, so underneath Kythera. And it would have been never even heard of, but once upon a time, back in the ancient times, there was a what we believe now was a 70-meter grain ship, but instead of carrying grain, it was carrying precious artifacts from around the Mediterranean in the time of the Roman Empire. This included marble statues, bronze statues, and other incredible artifacts, and it basically struck the rocks and sunk. And if we then go
Okay.
forward in time to around 1900, the traditional means of gathering sponges from under the sea by the Greek sponge divers was the brass helmet and air pump standard dress diving equipment. So
Yeah.
there was a big storm, and the sponge divers' boat was not able to fish for sponges, so they quickly got themselves into the sheltered side of the rock of Antikythera and tried to hide out the storm. But while they were there, the chief diver, the captain, he said, "Listen, we're here, we're anchored, we're safe. Maybe there's some sponges here. Go and have a look." So one of the divers, probably one of the junior divers, he went in to see if there were any sponges. He went down to the seabed and immediately gave the emergency signal, pulling on his line, because 1900s there were no radios or comms. It was simply line pulls. And they brought him back to the surface and took off the faceplate of his helmet. And all he could say, making no sense, was the seabed is covered in bodies, men, women, horses. The seabed is covered in bodies. So the chief diver, more experienced, was like, you're crazy, you're narcos. I'm going down, I'll see what's there. So he went down, and the diver was correct. The bottom was covered in bodies, but the bodies were made of marble and bronze. And
Okay.
probably some of the best bronze statues from antiquity that are now in the Archaeological Museum in Athens came from that one wreck site. And it was known as the Antikythera wreck because there was no way to name it.
How many marble statues?
So the bronzes, I believe there's the Antikythera youth, there's the philosopher, there is three marble horses and an enormous 2 meter high marble statue of Hercules. They're the famous ones in the museum, but in storage out the back, there are many, many more. But what made it famous was not the statues, it was they found a concreted lump of stone, but in that concreted lump, there were little green pieces, and green is generally bronze or copper or something like this that has corroded. And when they finally managed to look inside this lump, this concreted lump, using technology from X-ray and through to some purpose-built technology, they saw that inside this lump were cogs, like the mechanism of a clock. So, like, this doesn't make sense. This shouldn't exist. It's too early. So, when they finally were able to break open this lump with conservation and find out inside were a large number of cogs and other components, and realized this was what became famous as the Antikythera mechanism, which is believed to be some sort of device for predicting the movement of bodies in space, like planets or stars or comets or something. And it's incredibly detailed and it's been studied to great extent. So the site became famous. So then roll forward to 1976, and Cousteau and the Calypso,
Uh-huh.
in one of their episodes, In Search of Roman Plunder, they go and re-find and re-excavate the Antikythera Rex site, and they find new artifacts, including new sculptures, hoping
Mhm.
to find more parts of the mechanism. And they finished, and then basically roll on again to around 2000, and then Dr. Brendan Foley of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute put together a team, and I was brought in to train the team on rebreather and then to be the supervisor of the team on the project to re-find, again, begin excavating the site. And between 2000 and 2006, we did one project per year. Some years we did two projects per year, one in the spring, one in the autumn, and continued to study and map and excavate the site. So that was how I became involved with Antikythera.
Wow, that's really interesting. I would love to dive these wrecks, but
The interesting thing about the Antikythera site is if we qualified you to normoxic trimix and we took you out on a boat and we dived together and I said, right, let's go. This is the site of the Antikythera wreck. Let's go dive. And we'd go down, follow the cliff wall down, and we'd come down to the first ledge at around 45 to 55 meters and we'd swim around. And because I know what's there and I've got a trained eye for this type of thing, I'd find a
Mhm.
few things, move some sand, move some gravel, and show you some pieces of debris and what have you. And we'd come up and say, "There you go, you've dived the Antikythera site. You can
Yeah,
see a ship because there's no ship
yeah,
there."
no ship there.
So some wooden parts were recovered, deeply buried, so they were protected by being buried, but most of the hull would have rotted away many, many years ago because this wreck dates over 2,000 years. One thing we did find on the wreck, which is almost inconceivable, is basically completely intact human remains of what is now believed to be a small female. and around that area, jewelry. So basically, one of the passengers, when the wreck sunk, was basically buried by the sediment, and that kept them intact. And so these remains were recovered and, of course, handled respectfully. But it's something you don't expect to find on a 2,000-year-old wreck in the warm waters of the Mediterranean. So the thing about maritime archaeology is you just never know what surprise is going to come out of the sediment during your work.
Yeah. And what about the wreck of the 1495 Gripschunden?
Ah, yes. Gribshunden is Griffin Hound, and the
Yeah.
reason the wreck is called the Griffin Hound is the figurehead on the front of the ship is a dragon's head with a man's head in its mouth. And so if you think to 1495, the sailors were very superstitious. So in a battle, this ship would come towards you with this dragon's head eating a man's head, and then the cannons would begin to fire. Now, the ship was the flagship of the King of Denmark because this particular area of what is now Sweden in 1495 was actually part of Denmark. So it was King Hans of Denmark's ship, and it's only 12 meters of depth. It's very, very shallow, but by using rebreather, we could have very, very long archaeological working bottom times with no decompression. So up
Hmm.
to 3 hours of working on the wreck. And what we did with archaeological techniques and photogrammetry, we systematically lowered the seabed centimeter by centimeter, very delicately with paintbrushes, and gradually the artifacts started to appear. And because it's the Baltic, the
Hmm.
water is low salt, anoxic, and it's also very cold. So things like sheets of birch bark engraved with peacocks and chimera, wicker baskets, leather bags of saffron, and other fine goods were recovered from amongst the silt. And the entire hull of the ship is there buried in the mud. It was really quite amazing to see literally a time capsule of history from 500 years ago was things as delicate as a leather bag of coins, a leather bag of saffron, which in 1495 would have come on the spice road from the Far East. So, value wise, that saffron was probably worth more than its own weight in gold. And these things are coming out of the sediment in perfect condition. And the beauty is, archaeology, by its very nature, to discover, you have to destroy. So you've got to dig away the seabed or the land to expose the archaeology. Now we have photogrammetry, you can model it before and during. So what you end up with, if you play back those models over the 30 days of a project, one day the wreck is lowered by maybe 2 centimeters and the tips of artifacts appear. 10 days later, the whole artifact appears. Then you lift it, map it, photograph it, model it, survey it, continue beneath it, and the next artifact appears. So you end up with a photogrammetric time capsule where you can play back the excavation of the site, meaning you've recorded it as it was for all time. So it's modern archaeology is far more protective of what's there.
What's the typical dives like on these projects?
So on Gribshunden, we'd basically stayed in a hostel on shore. We'd get up, have breakfast, go load the boat, and we'd go out on the boat and anchor up on the pontoon that was moored permanently on 4 anchors over the site. And then we'd prep the rebreathers, do the rebreather pre-checks. We'd then have a team briefing from the dive safety officer, which was myself. And then the teams would stagger. So the first team would go down, generally the camera team first while the visibility was good, and they'd take a photogrammetric model and images of the previous day's work. Then the first archaeological team would go down, always with a scientist, so one of the archaeologists as the prime, and then one of the professional divers as their guardian and assistants and rigger. And they would go down and work an area of the site for maximum of 3 hours. Close to the end of their dive, the second team would go in and they would exchange information on seabed while they hand over from team one to team two. And this would continue until all the teams had finished their dive. So we might successfully put 3 teams in the water, each with a 3 hour bottom time with a small overlap. So you'll get an incredibly productive day. And then we'd basically bring artifacts up, put them in water, cover them over to keep the light away from them. All of this, and a team would transfer back to shore. Rebreathers were stripped, disinfected, and left to dry. Cylinders were refilled, artifacts were conserved, and then everyone would go back to the hostel, evening meal, debrief, maybe a movie, and then a good night's sleep. to repeat that again for sometimes 30 days in a row.
Okay. Must be like fine-tuned machines, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's because you've got basically the team that did Gribshunden is the same team that did the veteran recovery from the B-24, and the same team that did Antikythera, and the same team that did the peninsulas of Crete. And most of that team, certainly the professional divers of the team, I trained myself, and nearly all of the scientists on all of those projects I trained myself. So it is a finely tuned machine because it's a team that's built and been tuned as a machine over a decade. So it's not just a bunch of individuals just meet up, go, hey, let's go diving. This is a team that have worked together, trained together, planned together, evolved together for a decade.
wow. You've just said about the recovery of the World War II wreck.
Yes.
What was it like? I'm a big World War II buff. What's it like to recover the and repatriate the airmen from the bombers?
Well, to start with, it's a huge privilege. It's a huge honor to have the opportunity to be able to be involved in such work and then to see it reach its ultimate conclusion where a family member from that lost veteran, a young man who gave everything to defend his country and to defend the free world. And when basically a granddaughter then writes to you as a diver, a handwritten letter thanking you for returning their family member back, and you see the photos of them receiving a full military honours burial ceremony at Arlington. It's the most rewarding work that I've ever done in any field of my life, but especially within diving because it has purpose. It really has purpose, and it gives closure to a family. They know their family member didn't come home from the war, but they don't have anything to prove what happened. And this is basically comes about because the US have an organization called the DPAA, which is the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, and their remit is to find and repatriate every fallen American forces personnel that was lost in a theater of war. And so there are, tens of thousands, and they do their research to see if they can get fairly conclusive evidence of where a veteran or a group of veterans may be. When it's an aircraft in the sea, it comes from what's called a missing air crew report. And then they look at the missing air crew report and they put it together with witnesses from the time, reports, etc., and determine the feasibility of how likely it is that you would have a chance of recovering someone from a given site. So, for example, if a site is in deep water and it's an area where trawl fishing has happened for the last 30 years, and the survey shows that the wreck has been broken up, scattered over a huge area, chance of success is lower than if you've got a completely intact wreck that people are diving already for recreation and the story matches up, that you've got a good chance of finding someone on that wreck. And then they'll basically look at that as a feasible wreck. And then what they'll do, they'll award that to a group specialize in this type of maritime archaeology. The scientist or the archaeologist will be sent to forensic laboratories in Hawaii called JPAC, and they'll be taught
Mhm.
human recovery, forensic archaeology specialty skills. And then a team are basically put together, trained, and go out and deploy on the site. And I've been lucky enough to do two of these jobs that have resulted in 100% success of successful location, recovery, and repatriation of the individual concerned. The first was the B-24 Tulsa American off the
Mhm.
island of Vis in Croatia, and that was Lieutenant Eugene Ford. And the second was an unnamed B-17 bomber, also off the island of Vis in Croatia, a few years later on, which was Lieutenant Ernest Vignew. Both of those went home to their family. Both had Arlington military ceremonies. Both were buried where their family chose. And we had feedback from both families as a result of the project. And then I've also been involved with several other DPAA projects to locate sites, survey sites. These surveys and locations may in the future progress to recovery projects, but obviously everything in the world has to be funded. A location is one budget, a survey is a second budget, and a full recovery operation is another budget. And of course, the budgets get higher as the project gets more complicated, the recovery being the highest of all. So it's an incredible opportunity to be able to be involved in something like that, all the more so when it succeeds.
And it must have been really emotional as well, yeah?
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's it's hard to describe um, the people who are involved in the project. Certainly, the dive team who are and the bottom diver team, the people who are actually on the wreck. They do form this. I know it's a cliche these days, but they do form this band of brothers, a team that have worked on multiple projects like that together. And when success is achieved, that moment is very hard to describe. It's almost impossible to put into words. When you succeed, meaning you found what you were sent to locate, it's nothing but respect because you realize immediately what this is. This is basically a true hero who gave everything, their life, and their family lost that family member for something they believed in, and it's to fight for their country in a world war. And it's kind of like a sense of pride, of humbleness, of emotion, all of this rolled into one because you realize that basically as a team you've succeeded, and it's not a like yay we've succeeded, it's more like well now this family have their burial and closure and they've got a place to go to grieve and they can put an end to this. And yeah, it's a pretty special moment.
Talking of World War II wrecks, have you dived the Hermes aircraft carrier in off Sri Lanka?
I haven't, no. No.
Oh, that's one wreck you should. It's one of the, I think it's the only diveable aircraft carrier,
I
and
believe
it's
so,
a
yes.
war grave as well because of the lives lost. I dived it in 2015 with my Sri Lankan friends, and it was stunning as well as very, very emotional as well during the
Yeah.
dive.
Yeah.
Just passing, knowing the history,
Yes.
knowing how many people passed away and how many bodies are inside.
I found the same thing. I was lucky to dive the wrecks of Narvik, of the first and second battle of Narvik in northern Norway,
Oh, okay.
and also to dive some of the wrecks from Project Hannibal in the Baltic Sea.
Mm.
And again, same thing. A lot of people lost their lives on that battle and that project, and it's very humbling to dive for such sites and know what happened there and what was lost there. So it's
Yeah.
quite an amazing experience.
You should try and dive the Hermes.
Yeah, yeah, one day. Unfortunately, the bucket list is very long. I still every year I try to tick off one or two things on my bucket list that have been big lifetime wishes forever. I've managed to achieve one of those this year, but every year I try to do two things. I try to do a training course where I'm the student and I learn something new. I try to do a project or a trip that's on my bucket list to do something in my diving that I've never done before and I've kind of always wanted to.
You're a rebreather educator, so you've worked on multiple units, platforms. What's your go to setup and why?
So basically, it's evolved over the years. I'm a strong believer that there's not one perfect rebreather for every task. So warm water, deep water, small caves, big caves, freezing cold water, all of these things. It's like saying what's the perfect car depends what conditions you're driving in. So if you were like you know wealthy, like you know Tony Stark, and you could have a collection of cars, you'd have 20 cars for different purposes, one for
Yeah.
this, one for this, and one just for fun. But right now, for the last decade, my rebreather of choice, effectively my sole platform, is the JJ. It's an incredibly reliable, very robust, and very simple system. It's ideal for doing like commercial work on rebreather, example, maritime archaeology or maritime marine biology, sample taking, etc. It's driven by shearwater, which is
Yep.
extremely easy to use, very clear to read, and it really just basically does what it says on the tin. So what I'm doing with my diving now and have been doing with my diving for the last decade, my opinion, and it's always individual opinion, it's the right tool for the job in where I am now with my diving. Previously, I've used other systems, and they at the time suited what I was doing at that point. Obviously, for
Mhm.
15 years of my career, I was research, test, and development diver for Kevin Gurr's companies. So I was the test diver on the Ouroboros, then the Sentinel. Kev's company put the Prism 2 and the Explorer through CE for the Hollis company.
Mhm.
So I was
Yep.
test diver on those as well. And they're all good units. So I've dived very few units that I didn't think had a purpose and were good for what that purpose was. But right now, most of my diving is cold water. I'm not really a warm water diver, and the JJ is really king of the pile for deep cold water diving.
Talking of JJ, the Maldives military just got 30 units.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah, we've been pushing, like, even when I was in the military with the dive teams, we were pushing for such a long time to get rebreathers because of the amount of deep dives we have to do, recovery dives, dead
yeah.
bodies to salvaging wrecks and stuff. So we never got in those days. And now, thanks to the Japanese government, they got 30 JJs,
Wow,
which is good.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good.
I'm on the Dives of Liberty.
Uh huh. Yep.
Yeah, I'm doing the Across Maldives project next year on the Dives of Liberty, the side mount version.
I was trained on the side mount version by Nadir, a good friend of mine in
Yeah. Yeah.
southern Switzerland.
Yep.
He was my student and my instructor trainee for maybe 2 decades on the Ouroboros, then the Sentinel, and on Cave. And then the tables turned when Divesoft loaned me a side mount Liberty to assess for my own needs.
Uh-huh.
Nadir became my trainer, so we were able to dive the wreck of the Haven in Genoa at the end of the crossover training to the unit. So yeah, I'm aware of the unit. Beautiful manufacturing. Yeah, very grateful for the training from Nadir.
Nadir is a good friend as well. And when I got the unit, I did the crossover in Malta.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah. At TechWise.
yeah,
Yeah. I did 5 days of training on that, and it's really good unit for what I'm doing.
yeah.
Yep.
Like I said, I don't think you know. At the end of the day, when I started rebreather diving over 20 years ago, there was less control and quality and legislation because everything was new. It was like rebreather was the next step. As we said earlier, nitrox was voodoo gas. Everyone thought it was dangerous, didn't understand it. Then
Yeah.
it was established, and it basically is now normal. And then rebreathers came along, and they were, "What's this? It's different. It's new. We don't understand it. Keep away. Keep away." And now, because the training has improved so much, and more importantly, the certification of the rebreathers through CE has changed. So their safety, their reliability, their usability has improved tenfold from what it was 20 years ago. Any of the rebreathers that are certified, tested, effectively classed are going to be fit for purpose because they've all been through the same set of tests. It's like when you buy a car, you buy a car with a safety rating. So you know it's safe to take your family out for a ride in it, etc., etc. Rebreathers have become much more commonplace, and it's a good thing because it's the right tool for the job, especially with the price of helium now.
Yeah. Exactly. My first rebreather, the first rebreather I've dived was when I did the clearance diver course in India with the Indian Navy. It was the Technisub or the Oxygen's 55 or 57. I
Uh
can't
huh.
remember the name. Yeah. No computers, nothing, no valves. I mean, no pressure gauge on the oxygen tank even.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was a good 6 months training with that unit, which
yeah,
was
yeah.
gave me a. Then when I was with the Maldives Coast Guard diving units, we got a Japanese rebreather. You must have heard of it, Fieno.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we had a pheno in Kev's company for trial and test. If you think about the target audience where it was built, the counterlung was very very small. So if you
Oh
were
yeah.
basically a large person, it was actually quite difficult to use it normally because the counterlung was so small.
Yeah, it was small, and also for the military, it was not the right unit because it
Ah,
was fully plastic.
yeah.
And one thing I like about it, it was, I think, one of the first ones that came with it's like a cartridge, just to
Yes. Yep.
the
Yeah.
soap cartridge. You just
Yep.
push it in, it's done.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what other units have you dived?
So I started on the Mark 15.5, and then I moved on to the Inspiration because I was working with Dave Thompson, who was the inventor of the unit
Yeah.
through AP. And then I moved very quickly on to the Ouroboros because that was Kevin's first unit. We started diving the Mark 15.5 on treasure project in Guam. And basically, when we came back from that, Kev decided he wanted to dive his own unit and design his own unit to suit the needs of what he wanted. So the Ouroboros came from that. The Ouroboros was the first system that I put 1,000 hours on. So it's quite a special rebreather in my heart. And then from that, the Ouroboros evolved into the Sentinel, and I was
Yeah.
test diver and primary trainer on that. So that was the second unit I was able to put 1,000 hours on. And that changed hands of ownership, became the Red Head and the Red Bear systems, which I continued to be an instructor, trainer, and diver on for some time. And then during that period, working with Kevin, I was a trainer and instructor on the Prism 2, the Explorer, electronic semi-closed recreational rebreather. I've dived on the Cisluna Mark IV, also the Megalodon. The just trying to think now, it's making me scratch my brain and remember back. Obviously, the JJ is now my preference unit. And for a while, I lived in Grand Cayman for a year. So I was working at Dive Tech over there. So at that time, I was teaching the Hammerhead, which evolved into the Defender and then the XCCR, with support from the Thornton family in the US. So I was basically an instructor trainer on those units. But I suppose across that sort of varied career, and there's lots of other small units for small number of hours, but basically the Ouroboros and the Sentinel platform and then the JJ have been my three prime units. Basically, just past 4,000 CCR hours now, um, out of just over 8,000 total in water hours in my career. The JJ, Ouroboros, and Sentinel represent the biggest part of that amount of rebreather diving.
Wow. That's a lot of units and a lot of hours.
It is a lot of time
Yeah.
underwater.
Yeah. What's the hardest during expeditions? Is it the paperwork or logistics?
It's going
Like,
home. I never want to go
Really?
home. It's like, I think I was born to be an explorer and on expedition. So when you finally have to go home, it's like, yeah, no, I don't really want to go home. I'm really quite happy here.
I've got a set of questions. It's like sort of a rapid fire.
Yeah, cool. That's good.
Yeah. You got to answer fast. Yeah.
Okay.
Worst dive site food you've ever had?
Ah, that's right. Worst dive site food I've ever had. So that's probably like, army rations. So basically I've dived in remote cave projects where the only thing you can eat is basically secondhand out of date army rations that you can buy from the military surplus shop.
Yeah, the
So it's
MREs.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
basically like tinned meats and impossibly tough biscuits and just actually the ones I'm talking about are before the MREs, the old British Army tinned and foil packet rations.
Oh,
But
okay.
but the I've had MREs as well, and they're equally disgusting. So, when you're on expedition, you're so hungry, you're burning so many calories, you're grateful for anything, and a bottle of Tabasco in your small personal allowance goes a long way to make just about anything edible.
What's the most underrated dive location in the world?
The UK. So people always think the UK is going to be bad visibility and cold, but we've got, for example, on the south coast, there's like in excess of 5,000 shipwrecks from World War One, World War Two, and from early history. And some of those shipwrecks are quite amazing, from White Star liners to battleships to submarines. And then the marine life is way more diverse than most people would think. So I've just come back from 9 days of marine environmental DNA sampling in the Sea of Hebrides off of the northwest coast of Scotland. And every dive was just a plethora of rainbow colored soft coral marine life. So, to anyone who's like a worldwide diver, Caribbean, Maldives, go, I'm never going to the UK, it's cold, there's nothing to see. It's definitely an underrated diving location for sure.
I want to dive the. Is it Lundy?
Lundy Island, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a seal on deco with us last week in Scotland. So we came up to 6 meters from an 80-meter sampling dive. We're just hanging out doing our deco, and this big male seal, he came between us, he went round us, he went over the top of us, he swam under us, he came between us. 15 minutes of the deco. It's pretty cool.
Since I'm not far away from UK, so I'm thinking of really going. Saeed Rashid, photographer.
I know of. I don't know
Yeah,
personally.
he's a good friend, so gonna try and talk to him to join me and guide me around.
Very good. Very good.
What's scarier, diving in silt or public speaking?
Neither. So basically, I'm very happy public speaking, and I don't mind. So, for example, at Baltic Tech, which I'm a regular speaker for, the biggest audience was 600 people, and for me, talking to six people when I'm teaching a class or talking to 600 in an auditorium is the same thing, as long as the speaker is talking about something they're passionate about and they're
Yeah.
knowledgeable about, so they're staying in their lane. And as long as the audience, whether it's six or 600, are engaged and interested, never get nervous speaking because I'm talking about what I love and what I know, and I know the people in the audience want to hear it. Diving in silt, I'm a commercial diver, British cave and sump diver, so diving in
So,
silt is my normal environment. So
so
yeah,
nothing to be scared
definitely
of.
no, definitely neither of those.
Were you genuinely scared underwater at any time?
I think there's a degree of apprehension, which is a better, more appropriate medical word for what some people would call fear, on every single dive. And I think if there wasn't, I would be more worried, and maybe I would be more likely to postpone or cancel a dive if I didn't have that apprehension, because that apprehension shows respect because we cannot breathe underwater. We're able to safely do these things and come back alive and uninjured because we follow protocol, we do pre-checks, we do post-dive maintenance, we have a procedure, and then on top of that, we dive as a team. So if I had a dive ever was like, yeah, I'm not at all worried about this, I'm not even and no apprehension at all, this will be a piece of cake. I would probably cancel that dive because like, why am I thinking like that? No dive is a piece of cake. I'm underwater. So yeah, that would be my best
Yeah.
approach to that.
One place you still dream of diving?
Antarctica.
Okay. Why is that?
Basically, by reading, my prime reading category that I'm really interested in and have a huge quantity of books in my library of is polar exploration. So both Arctic and Antarctic. So Amundsen, Scott, Shackleton, and others. And of course, the last area of Antarctica to be truly explored is under the surrounding ice and the ice packs, to the
Mhm.
extent that just a couple of years ago they found Shackleton's ship Endurance with AUVs in stunning condition
I saw
under
the
the
documentary.
yeah. And when you look under the ice, the color and the size of the cold water marine life, you get starfish that are a meter across, sponges
Yeah.
that are big enough that you could sit inside of them. So the nutrients, everyone thinks, oh, it's freezing, it'll be dead. It's the opposite. The life there is decades old and huge because the water is so rich. So it's a the why is a no-brainer. I've dived in minus water temperatures, so
Mhm.
basically temperatures below zero where the seawater stops the freezing occurring,
Yeah.
and the cold can be managed by equipment and
Yeah.
procedures. But so what's there to see outweighs any of the difficulties or even a mild bit of discomfort.
One final question, Phil. You're a fellow of the Explorers Club. You've done some impressive stuff. What keeps you diving after all these years?
I can honestly say, so near to me, there's a small inland flooded stone quarry that rake divers use as a training site. It's 30 meters deep. On a good day, it's 5 to 6 meters visibility. On a bad day, it's 2 meters visibility. And it's a great place just to go and practice skills. And I can honestly say, if I go there on a weekend, if I have a month where I'm busy working but there's no opportunity to dive, I'll pick a weekend and I'll go there and I'll do a couple of dives just to get wet, practice skills, check equipment out, etc. And I can honestly say, and the people that know me will know this is an honest, true statement. I get as much pleasure, enjoyment, and I go away full of happiness and calm from a dive in that little lake with nothing really much to see as I do on an expedition dive or a cave dive or a project dive. I just get genuine pleasure out of every single dive I do. Um, I'm kind of, some people might say it makes me a little bit sad or nerdy or a geek, but I read diving books, I watch diving movies, I go diving, and I talk about diving, and that's me.
And that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's how it should be.
yeah.
Phil, it's been insane hearing your stories, caves, history, Vorex. and technical madness. Thank you for the decades of knowledge and the absolutely mental career you've shared.
Thank you
where
very much.
where can people follow what you're working on next, or any projects you want to shout out about?
So I'm on Instagram as Phil Short Explorer, and I have a Facebook page which is Phil Short Technical. I try to update everything I'm doing on there. So the recent project to Scotland is on there, and the previous project this year to northern Finland for ice dive supervisor training is on there. I also have a LinkedIn page, which is just my name. And then also where I work at the moment is a research facility that's building subsea habitats for long duration human presence in the ocean. So like the equivalent of space stations, but for the deep ocean. And that's called Deep Research Labs. And we have both a website, a LinkedIn page, and an Instagram that people can follow and see what we're doing here, because it's equally exciting to my own personal as my own personal stuff.
I'll make sure that I put all those in the podcast as well.
Perfect.
And that's it for today's descent, guys. Remember, some people dive for fun, others dive for work, and some, like Phil, dives 12 kilometers into a mountain and call it Tuesday. And this was Shaft Dives You Crazy. Stay safe, stay weird, and we'll see you next time.